Hello, hello. Welcome to Alpha Beta Soup, where we unpack Bitcoin using on-chain analysis. I'm TXMC. Today, we'll take a look around at the data and make sure that our overall thesis of a supply squeeze is still in play. We've had some chop this week in the price. There's been some volatility, some fake news about Litecoin, and I want to make sure that everything is still pointing in the same direction it was the last time we spoke. If you're enjoying this content, please give this video a like, please subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you know when I post new videos. Let's not waste any time. As I record this here on the 15th of September, price is breaking out of this consolidation zone that we had been in after the flash crash here on September 7th. It's very encouraging to see that. It's still early to say that we've actually escaped from this area. We need to see a couple of candles close and an actual trend develop. But it's a good time to look around and make sure that everything still looks positive. Where we'll start first is the realized price distribution. In my previous video, we talked about a chart on checkonchain.com that showed the distribution of Bitcoin across every price level. This is that same chart on Glassnode. I bring it up today because we have an interesting development here in the current price range around 45 to 47,000. If you'll notice, the amount of volume that has now accumulated here in the current set of coins is the highest amount of volume since price was around 10,000, which was like last October 2020. This now represents one of the most significant price levels for all current holders of Bitcoin. This gray bar represents the price as of this moment, and you can see we sit atop a tower of on-chain volume that has been realized in the last few days. The longer we hang out in this area, the more this volume node will continue to grow, and the more this area of price will have a significance to people holding coin moving forward. We can see there's still a little bit of emptiness here. There's not a lot of owned coin in the range from around 39,000 up to around 45. But, if price finds itself down here, maybe some of this fills in before we ultimately take off out of this range into the next phase of the market. That remains to be seen. And this isn't a technical analysis channel where I make price predictions. So we'll observe the market and react accordingly. But I do want to keep in mind how important it is that we be aware of where large volume nodes currently sit in this present set of coins. We call this the UTXO set. Inside of every Bitcoin address are a bunch of UTXOs, unspent transaction outputs, that represent the leftover change from all the previous transactions that took place on that address. Every time an address participates in a transaction, the protocol takes a few UTXOs out of your wallet to cover the cost, and whatever's remaining is sent back to you in the form of a new UTXO. This is how volume moves around on chain, through these units. And when we look at them on a chart like this, it gives us an idea of the cost basis of everyone currently holding Bitcoin. Here is the spent volume age bands, which we've looked at in 2 of the previous videos. The links for those will be in the description. We've spoken at length about the importance of watching 6-month and older hands, because they tend to start relinquishing their coins and coming back to life as price breaks previous highs, the market gains strength, and those older hands look to realize gains into strength and seek liquidity to exit. Then they reset for the next market cycle. So far, we've seen a couple of small spikes here in 6-month and older hands. That's what this is filtered down to see. You can see up here these younger brackets have been disabled. They're in gray. But here, there was a small spike on September 9th, a couple days after the flush. We saw a few older coins being spent, but relatively a small amount compared to how much you can see during real spikes. And in the few days since, it's been very quiet. Here, I'll zoom in just so you can see. These are the last few days. So this is good. Price is going back up. We're growing out of this basin here, and we're not seeing huge spikes of activity. That's fine. No warning signs yet, but we're keeping an eye on this chart. This chart represents the amount of Bitcoin on all exchanges. It was going pretty much straight up from July 2013 all the way until March of 2020. And since then, this trend has reversed, and it has not turned around. It's been perpetually declining ever since, minus a spike here during the sell-off as people looked to get out. It's really interesting now. In each of the previous bull markets, this bull market here and this one here in 2017, both, even as price was declining, the balance on exchanges was still going up. Here it was going up dramatically still. But now we have price going up and the balance on exchanges is coming down. This is very different. We still have the same kind of hodler behavior. We have long-term holders selling as price breaks the previous high and then accumulating in lows. That's still happening. We'll look at the long-term holder supply chart a little later in this video. You know, a lot of the hodler behavior that we expect is still happening cyclically as it has before. But this is a new wrinkle. Coins being taken off of exchanges. That restricts the available supply, and it helps to contribute to this overall thesis that I've been building on this channel of a supply squeeze. Keep an eye on this chart. If we start to see exchange balances radically increasing from their historical trend for the last year, then that might be a sign that people are gearing up to exit. Worth watching. Our next stop today is on this chart, which shows the supply held by entities that have different balances. The red line, the smoother of the two lines, includes all entities that have no more than one Bitcoin. So these are the smaller players, everyday folks, those who dollar cost average, the people who are just buying $25 here and there whenever they've got extra money. Those individuals are the red line. You can see that their collection is growing almost endlessly. This is over 2 years now. The gold line is all of the entities that have 1,000 or more Bitcoin. I've taken out exchanges, but there are some other institutions in here, smaller institutions, private companies, and wealthy individuals that have 1,000 or more Bitcoin. Their balance did taper off dramatically here at the beginning of the year. We talked about this 2 videos ago. I'll leave a link in the description so you can understand the history here. But in the previous bull run, this group sold as price broke the previous high, and their balance was declining for much of the summer. But around here, as we hit the low, the end of July, you can really see, first there was a massive jump, and then there's just been a steady increase in the group's supply overall. But generally, the two groups are both increasing, despite price chop and instability here. This day, this September 7th that we went over in the previous videos, this day we lost, over 10% in price, but still, their holdings, let me zoom in even more, their holdings increased. There's an up and down, but it's an uptrend. Very interesting to me. So we've looked at entities that have less than 1 Bitcoin. We've looked at entities that have more than 1,000. But what about everyone who lives in the middle? We've got the whales and we've got the minnows, but what about all the other species of fish and the sharks and all of them? So let's take a look. Okay, here are the other entities. The purple line, this line here, are all entities that have 1 to 10 Bitcoin. You can see their supply has been increasing all summer. This line, entities with a balance of 10 to 100 Bitcoin. The line is a bit flatter, but it's still been generally in an uptrend. Recently, they've reduced slightly. It looks like this, there was kind of a peak here at the bottom and a bit of selling off, but recently it started to increase again. This last line represents people who have between 100 and 1,000 Bitcoin. This is kind of a mixed bag of folks. You've got high net worth individuals, there's some smaller companies, and also probably some people who've been stacking coins since the price was very low, since the early days. So we've got a good collection in here. The supply for this group has been pretty flat since May. There's been a small increase. I'll zoom in here. There's been a small increase recently. All 3 of these groups are seeing upticks. Uptick, uptick, uptick. So what are we gaining by looking at this? What are we learning? Well, what I think we can learn from this is that all of our notable groups that stack coin are continuing to behave that way. We aren't seeing any of these groups roll over, which speaks to me about a continued confidence in the hodler base. If they hold to historical trends, they likely won't begin selling until price begins to break the previous high, which means we need to get up into the 60Ks and have this trend continue to hold to ensure that we have a chance to create new highs. I pull up this chart, which shows active addresses and active entities, because I want to ensure that activity on the network is continuing to trend in a positive direction. Price can go up on low volume, but for a rally to be sustained, for us to see new highs and for it to result in a proper bull run, we need to see activity on chain trending upwards. Of interest here is the trend over the summer. So these 2 lines, the orange line represents active addresses each day, the amount of addresses that are taking part in transactions. Blue represents active entities, the individuals on chain who own the addresses that are active each day. I like to look at them together because entities are clustered together using some native algorithms that are owned by us at Glassnode. And while they are very accurate and stable over the long term, it's important to also look at the native address count, which is not done with any algorithmic clustering. It's just a raw count of addresses on chain. I like to see them together. That way we get a good vision of both layers of activity in the way that we track them. So you can see here activity increasing as price is increasing from spring of 2020 all the way through the end of the year until January when we hit this top around 40K. Activity dips, comes back up, is flat, and then falls off. But what is encouraging for me now is to see that both of these lines are trending in a positive direction. Since July, it looks like active entities each day is starting to trend up. There's ups and downs, but generally it's growing. We're setting higher lows. If I back out on this chart, something else that I think is really encouraging and just speaks to kind of the continued growth of Bitcoin is to notice that even when this line, even with active entities just completely precipitously falling off, it still hit this like baseline trend of growth here. You can see it, like, you know, here's the previous market. Here's the network really taking off. Here's all the exchanges coming online. Bitcoin really gets debuted to the world. This is the ICO craze. And, you know, activity never really comes back down to the previous level. It continues to grow. Here we set a spike, which just barely outpaced the amount of activity in 2017 and 2018, which really speaks to how crazy this time was. But still, when the baseline hits, it's considerably higher than this level here. So this is good to see. It just speaks to continued growth on the network. The last thing I want to touch on today is long-term holder supply. A lot of news in the Twitter space has been made about how long-term holder supply is now at the highest nominal value it's ever been at. 12.9 million Bitcoin now sit with long-term holders. That is a big number, and it's the highest number it's ever been. We've pointed out in numerous videos before that long-term holders have continued to behave in their historical trend. They sell into price strength as we break previous highs. They begin accumulating as price rolls over and reset for the next cycle. As price breaks the previous high, their supply goes down and they begin accumulating again. This wave trend has repeated in every cycle. And right now, long-term holders are continuing to accumulate. They began to sell as price broke the previous high around 19,000. Their holdings were relinquished into market strength. They realized profits, and around March, the group began accumulating. The net selling was extinguished, and there was more accumulation happening, and since then, the supply for this group has just been growing. I find this interesting. However, the circulating supply of Bitcoin is also going up all the time. So the fact that this hit an all-time high is interesting, but not the whole story. This line represents the long-term holder supply as a percent of circulating supply. Let me turn off the regular supply. So what we can see here, let's zoom in a bit, is that the percent of the circulating supply that sits with long-term holders recently broke out of a range that it had been stuck in since 2018. You can see it oscillates here as price goes up and down, and it had been stuck in this range. As of today, long-term holder supply makes up about 69% of all circulating Bitcoin. That means that roughly 7 out of every 10 Bitcoin sit with someone that has not moved those coins in at least 5 months. That is the cutoff time for Glassnode to consider a coin to be long-term held. This range here that it broke out of had been developing since 2017. And this level, the 70%, 69% that long-term holders now own of all Bitcoin, is the highest level it's been since March of 2017. This moment here is when the 2017 bull run began in earnest. This is when price broke the previous high over here around 1100. Long-term holders began selling in mass. New market entrants showed up. Excited new buyers bought Bitcoin at whatever price. They bought into the euphoria, they rode the hype, and it sent us into a parabolic blow off top. We're now at a similar level of supply ownership. But what I anticipate happening is what we've seen this group do historically. which is continue to hold their supply until price gets back towards the previous all-time high. If we start getting into the 60s and the 64Ks, it'll be very important that we watch this group and make sure that they're behaving the way that we expect them to. If this line starts to roll over and their supply starts diminishing long before we get to 60K, that would be a bit different. That would be setting a new pattern, and it would put my ears and eyes on alert. As we get into higher prices, there are two things that we need to make sure we see. The first being what we just spoke about. Long-term holders need to continue to accumulate their holdings and stack corn until we get back to the all-time highs. That is when they usually start to sell, and that would be the trend of a bull market. The second thing we need to see is active entities and active addresses increasing along with the transaction volumes that underlie these two metrics. We need to see more people showing up to the network exponentially so that this asset can see inflows at the level that it needs to sustain price growth when it is a $900 billion asset. We need to see more market participation, and we need to see long-term holders staying strong until we get back to 64K. And then it's game on, baby. All right, with all that said, we'll keep this video on the shorter side today. The market looks like it's in a good place, and we'll be watching closely over the coming days to make sure that the trend stays in place. I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments, and be sure to leave any questions if there are things that I didn't explain clearly or you want me to dive into more deeply next time. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at TXMCTrades. I post analysis regularly, and I try to answer as many of the questions in the comments as I can. Thanks for coming along on this journey with me. Take care of yourself, friends. We'll speak again soon. Cheers.